Mr. Mercer, your wife didn't want that statue there." The sentence landed so softly it should have disappeared under the applause, under the clink of champagne glasses, under the low string music drifting across the Mercer estate, but it didn't. It cut clean through everything. Jonathan Mercer's hand was still wrapped around the white silk drape he had just pulled from the statue when he turned toward the voice, slowly at first, as if his body needed a second to catch up with what his ears had heard. Guests in tailored suits and pale spring dresses followed his gaze across the garden. Near the catering tables, beside a silver tray of untouched sparkling water, stood a little black girl in a navy dress that looked carefully ironed but years older than she was. She couldn't have been more than 9. Her braids were neat, tied back with white beads that caught the late afternoon light, and in one small hand she held a strip of white ribbon stained at the edge with damp brown soil. For a moment nobody moved. Even the wind seemed to hesitate around the rose hedges and limestone paths. Behind Jonathan, the statue of his late wife rose from its marble base, elegant and severe, one stone hand resting over a sculpted heart. The engraved plaque below reflected the sun so sharply it hurt to look at. In loving memory of Helena Mercer. Beloved wife, beloved mother, beloved light. Jonathan blinked once. "What did you say?" he asked, and though his voice stayed level, something in it had thinned. The girl looked straight at him. Not defiant, not rude, just steady in a way that made several adults shift uncomfortably where they stood. "I said she didn't want it there," the girl replied. Her voice was small, but it didn't shake. A woman near the front let out an awkward laugh, the kind people use when they want the world to return to normal by force. Jonathan's fiancée, Evelyn Shaw, placed 2 polished fingers against the base of his arm and leaned in just enough to be seen doing it. "Jonathan," she murmured, smiling without warmth. "It's a child." But he was still looking at the girl. She stood beside an older woman in staff black, one of the longtime housekeepers, Miss Ruth, who had gone visibly pale. The little girl had Miss Ruth's hand half hidden in the folds of her dress, like she had been holding on until the moment became too big to keep inside. "What's your name?" Jonathan asked. "Amara," she said. "Amara Brooks." Somewhere to the left, a fountain kept spilling water into stone with that soft repeating sound rich homes always had, a sound meant to soothe. It didn't soothe anyone now. Jonathan stepped down from the low platform in front of the statue. His shoes crunched lightly over white gravel as he approached. He was a tall man, controlled in the way only men used to being obeyed could be, but Amara didn't lower her eyes. She lifted the ribbon in her hand instead. "I found this by the dirt," she said. "And there's something under the statue." This time there were murmurs, not laughter. Evelyn's expression tightened by a single degree. "Miss Ruth," she said crisply, "why is this child in the center of a private memorial?" Miss Ruth opened her mouth, then closed it again, her throat moving around words that wouldn't come. Amara answered for her. "I came with her," she said. "I help carry trays sometimes." Her eyes went back to Jonathan. "Last night I heard a sound from the garden. Like when you tap a wall, and it sounds empty behind it. I came this morning before everybody got here, and the dirt was soft around the base. Not old soft. New soft." Jonathan's gaze dropped, almost against his will, to the ground around the monument. The grass had been clipped short. The flower beds were perfect. The black mulch had been raked into clean arcs. But near the back edge of the marble base, where the shadow cut the light, the earth did look slightly darker, slightly disturbed. The kind of detail a man might miss when 10 landscapers and an event planner handled every inch of his life. "That proves nothing," Evelyn said, a little faster now. "Children imagine things. Jonathan, the guests are waiting." He didn't answer. Amara took one step closer, enough for the guests to inhale as a group. Then she opened her hand. Resting in her palm was a silver charm in the shape of a swan, its delicate neck curved into a half-heart. Mud clung to the tiny chain loop. Jonathan went still, completely still. The sun was warm on the garden. The musicians kept their bows hovering uncertainly above the strings, and from somewhere far off came the faint click of a camera phone being lowered. "She wore this when she was nervous," Amara said quietly. "I think she wanted somebody to find it." Jonathan stared at the charm as if it had risen from the ground, speaking his name. He knew that piece. Helena had worn it on quiet days, on difficult days, On the day she told him she hated public statues because they made grief look neat. The air changed. He felt it before anyone else did. The memorial no longer felt like remembrance. It felt arranged, built, covered. Evelyn's hand fell from his sleeve. Jonathan lifted his eyes from the swan to the base of the statue, then to the thin dark ring of turned soil behind it. And when he spoke again, his voice was low enough that everyone leaned in to hear it. "Nobody touches a thing," he said. Then, after one beat that seemed to stretch across the whole garden, "until we know what's under there." Jonathan Mercer had built entire companies on instinct, on the tiny shift in a room before numbers moved, before markets panicked, before other men noticed danger standing right in front of them. That instinct was speaking now, low and cold beneath his ribs, and he had learned long ago never to ignore it. The garden remained frozen around him. A waiter on the far end still held a tray angled in midair. The violinists had lowered their bows, but not their eyes. Even the guests, people who spent their lives talking through funerals, contracts, and public embarrassments, seemed to understand that something invisible had entered the ceremony and changed its shape. Jonathan stepped off the gravel path and moved toward the back of the statue. His polished shoes darkened with damp soil near the edge of the flower bed. Up close, the marble base looked flawless from the front, but behind it the landscaping lost its perfection. The dirt had been packed down, then disturbed again. Not by weather, by hands. He crouched, the cuffs of his black suit pulling tight at the knees, and pressed 2 fingers lightly into the earth. It gave more easily than it should have. Fresh, very fresh. Behind him, Evelyn exhaled in a careful little sigh. "Jonathan, please," she said, her voice still wrapped in that smooth social calm she wore so well. "Do not turn this into a spectacle. Helena deserves dignity." He did not look at her. "Dignity," he said quietly, brushing dirt from his fingertips, "and secrets are not the same thing." The sentence hung there longer than anyone liked. Miss Ruth made a small sound in the back of her throat, not quite agreement, not quite fear. Jonathan rose and turned to the event manager, a thin man with a tablet clutched against his chest. "Who supervised the statue installation?" The man blinked twice. "The landscapers handled final placement, sir, with approval from Mrs. Shaw and the memorial consultant." Jonathan's eyes moved to Evelyn then. Not sharply. That would have been easier. Instead, he looked at her with the kind of stillness that asked for facts and already disliked the answers. "You approved the final placement?" Evelyn's smile returned, brittle at the edges. "Of course I did. We all discussed the garden plan. You were traveling. I made sure everything was tasteful." Jonathan said nothing. He looked past her to the grounds crew waiting near the side hedge in matching green jackets. Men who had likely expected an easy afternoon of cleanup and overtime. "Who dug this area last?" he asked. The youngest of them glanced at the others, then at the older foreman beside him. The foreman removed his cap slowly. "We set the base 3 days ago, sir. But after that, nobody was supposed to touch it. That was the instruction." "Was it touched?" Jonathan asked. Another pause. "Looks like it was," the man admitted. The whisper that moved through the guests this time had weight in it. Not curiosity anymore. Calculation. Rich people knew the sound of a scandal before it fully formed. Jonathan turned back toward Amara. She still stood beside Miss Ruth, small against the polished crowd, the silver swan charm resting in her palm like something the earth had decided to return. "You said you heard something last night," he said. "Tell me exactly." Amara swallowed. Her fingers curled slightly around the charm, but her voice came out clear. "Miss Ruth was finishing in the kitchen, and I was waiting by the back hall because she said not to wander. But I heard a clunk outside. Not loud, like metal hitting something hard and then sliding. So I looked through the window by the garden door." Jonathan listened, without interrupting. "I could not see all the way," she continued, "but I saw somebody near the statue with a flashlight pointed down. Then the light went off fast. This morning the ribbon was in the dirt, and that charm was half buried by the back corner." Evelyn gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "This is ridiculous. A child sees a shadow, and now we are rewriting reality around it." "Enough," Jonathan said, and it was not loud, but it stopped her cold. He kept his eyes on Amara. "Did you see a face?" "No, sir," she said. "Just shoes." "What kind of shoes?" Several people shifted again, maybe expecting the question to be too much for her. "It was not white," Amara said. "Not all white. Cream, maybe. Clean on top, dirty by the bottom. Fancy shoes. Not work boots. Jonathan looked down without thinking. Evelyn wore cream leather heels. Perfect for photographs. Useless in wet soil. One heel had a faint dark stain near the outer edge. Tiny. Easy to miss. Impossible now that he had seen it. For the first time since the unveiling, something flickered across Evelyn's face too fast for most to catch. Not guilt exactly. More like irritation that events had stopped obeying her. Jonathan turned to his head of security, Thomas Wheeler, who had been standing near the gate with an earpiece and the posture of a man trained never to intrude until called. Close the garden, Jonathan said. No one leaves until I know what was placed under my wife's statue. Wheeler straightened immediately. Yes, sir. Several guests began to protest all at once, soft and offended, but one look from Jonathan silenced the bravest among them. His public face had returned now, the one newspapers described as controlled. But Miss Ruth, who had worked in that house long before the magazines and interviews, knew the difference between his public calm and the kind that came right before a truth broke loose. Jonathan extended his hand toward Amara. Not for the charm. For trust. She hesitated only a second before placing the silver swan in his palm. It felt colder than it should have under the warm spring sun. He closed his fingers around it and looked back at the statue. Helena had once told him that memorials were for the living, not the dead, that people built beautiful things when they wanted grief. To stand still and behave. At the time he had kissed her forehead and told her she thought too much. Now, staring at the disturbed soil beneath her carved likeness, Jonathan felt the memory return with a sting so clean it made his chest tighten. Maybe she had not been talking about grief at all. Maybe she had been talking about what people hide when they are certain no one small enough, quiet enough, or overlooked enough will ever think to look below the surface. He handed the swan to Wheeler. Call for proper tools, he said, and bring me every camera feed from this garden for the last 72 hours. Then he looked at the base one more time, the shadows gathering around the marble as the afternoon light began to thin, and for the first time in a very long while, Jonathan Mercer felt something he could not control settling into the air around him. It was not panic. Not yet. It was the shape of a question, and everyone in the garden could feel it opening. By the time the first toolkit arrived, the light over the Mercer garden had changed. The soft gold of late afternoon had thinned into something cooler, flatter, a pale wash over marble and trimmed hedges that made every face look more honest than it wanted to. No one had been allowed to leave. Guests who had come expecting a graceful memorial now stood in uneasy clusters along the stone paths, whispering behind lowered glasses and carefully neutral expressions. The musicians had packed their instruments in silence. A breeze moved through the white roses at the base of the terrace, carrying the clean scent of cut stems and damp earth. Amara noticed all of it. She noticed the way rich people whispered without moving their mouths much. She noticed the way Mr. Wheeler, the security chief, touched his earpiece every few seconds, even when nobody called him. She noticed that Miss Ruth kept rubbing the side of her thumb against her apron seam, the way people did when they were trying not to pray out loud. Jonathan Mercer stood near the statue with the silver swan charm still resting in his palm, opening and closing his fingers around it like he had not yet decided whether it was evidence or memory. He had taken off his suit jacket and draped it over the back of a nearby chair, but the white dress shirt beneath looked no softer on him. He watched as two men from the maintenance team approached the marble base with careful steps, one carrying a rubber mallet, the other a narrow steel probe and a flashlight. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Evelyn broke first. "This has gone far enough," she said, folding her arms so tightly the diamond bracelet on her wrist flashed against the dimming light. "Jonathan, these people are employees, not investigators. You are letting a child and a gardener's mess turn your wife's memorial into theater." The maintenance men froze in place, not from confusion, but from class instinct. When wealthy people began fighting, working people learned to become invisible until the storm passed. Jonathan did not raise his voice. He almost never did. "Then it should comfort you," he said, still looking at the base of the statue, "that truth does not need theater." Evelyn's mouth tightened. She looked around quickly, measuring the guests, the staff, the optics, all the little social calculations that had always come naturally to her. "You are grieving," she said more softly, pivoting now, trying a different key. That is what this is. Grief makes patterns out of nothing. Helena is gone, Jonathan. Digging up this garden will not bring you peace. At the sound of Helena's name, something changed in him, but not in the direction she hoped. He turned then, fully, and the expression on his face was not rage. It was worse. It was attention. Full, unsparing attention. "Do not tell me what my grief is doing," he said. "Not today." The words landed without force, yet Evelyn stepped back half an inch all the same. Near the edge of the crowd, one of the older guests quietly lowered his phone. Nobody wanted to be caught recording this now. Mr. Wheeler walked back from the house, carrying a tablet. "We are pulling the camera feeds, sir," he said. "There is one exterior angle on the west garden, but the view is partly blocked by the magnolia line after dark." Jonathan nodded once. "And the rest?" Wheeler hesitated. "There is a 90-minute gap in the archive from last night, between 11:42 and 1:12. This time the silence was different. It was no longer ceremonial. It was alive. Miss Ruth shut her eyes for just a second. Amara looked up at Jonathan and saw the smallest movement in his jaw. Not surprise. Confirmation. "Convenient," he said. "Very," Wheeler replied. The maintenance foreman cleared his throat carefully. "Sir, if you want to know whether there is a cavity under the slab, I can test the back corner first without damaging the whole thing." Jonathan stepped aside. "Do it." The foreman knelt in the dirt and pressed the steel probe into the soil near the rear edge of the marble base. The tool slid down easier than it should have, then struck something with a faint metal tick that carried farther than anyone expected. Several guests drew in breath at once. The foreman looked up slowly. "That is not stone, sir." Evelyn laughed then, but the sound came too quickly and died too fast. "A drainage pipe, obviously, or part of the support frame. This is ridiculous." Amara frowned. She had heard fear in adults before, usually hidden under anger or sarcasm. This sounded like that. Jonathan heard it too. "Probe the other side," he said. The foreman obeyed. Same result. Soft earth. Shallow depth. Hollow resistance. The man stood, brushing dirt from his knees, and did not need to say what everybody already felt. Something had been placed beneath the statue after installation. The wind rose across the garden, lifting the white ribbon streamers tied to the chairs from the ceremony. One of them snapped loose and skittered across the gravel until it caught near Amara's shoe. She bent to pick it up automatically, and as she did, her gaze shifted to the lower side panel of the marble base. There, almost hidden in the shadow line, was a smear she had not seen before. Not mud exactly, more like gray dust dragged by fabric. "Miss Ruth," she whispered, tugging gently on the older woman's sleeve. "Look." Miss Ruth followed her eyes and went still. It was only a mark, small enough most people would miss it, but she knew this house, these grounds, the cleaning schedules, the installers, the rhythm of what belonged and what did not. That smear was fresh, and it was at the exact height a person's dress hem or coat edge might brush while kneeling by the base. Miss Ruth lifted her face slowly toward Evelyn, whose cream heels were now half speckled with the same pale gray powder. She said nothing. She did not need to. Jonathan saw it too. His eyes dropped from the dust on the marble to the dust on Evelyn's shoes, and whatever hope remained in her expression dimmed all at once. "Move the guests back," he said to Wheeler. "Now." Wheeler signaled immediately. Security stepped forward, not rough, not urgent, but firm enough to create a wider ring around the statue. The maintenance men set their tools down, waiting for the final order. Jonathan walked to the base one last time and laid his fingertips against the cold marble just below Helena's carved name. His hand stayed there for a second longer than anyone expected. When he turned back, his face had the stillness of someone crossing an invisible line. "Lift it," he said, and this time, nobody argued. The maintenance men moved with the quiet caution of people who understood that one wrong inch could cost them their jobs. A portable lift was rolled across the gravel, its rubber wheels whispering over stone, and two heavy straps were fed beneath the marble base through narrow channels built into the support frame. The statue itself remained still above them. Helena Mercer's carved face lifted toward a sky that had gone pale and hard, the kind of evening light that flattened color and made everything look like evidence. No one in the garden spoke above a murmur now. The guests had been guided back to the terrace. Staff stood near the service path in a tense line of black uniforms and lowered eyes. Somewhere inside the house, a grandfather clock began striking the hour, each note carrying through the open French doors with formal indifference. Amara stood beside Miss Ruth and watched the straps tighten. She had never seen a statue lifted before. She had never seen rich adults look afraid of the ground. Jonathan Mercer did not take his eyes off the base for a second. The silver swan charm was no longer in his hand. He had placed it carefully on the linen-covered memorial table beside Helena's framed photograph, but his fingers still curled and uncurled as if the shape of it had stayed behind in his palm. Slowly, he said. The hydraulic motor hummed to life. The marble base shuddered once, so slightly most would have missed it, then rose less than an inch. Dirt crumbled from the edges in soft, dark clumps. A breath moved through the crowd. Not a gasp. Something thinner. The sound people made when fear had not yet decided what form to take. The foreman adjusted the lift with practiced hands. The base climbed another inch, then another, enough for the flashlight beam to slip beneath. He crouched, angled the light, and froze. Jonathan saw it immediately. "What is it?" he asked. The foreman looked up, his face drained of the easy deference it had worn all afternoon. "There is a box under there, sir." The words struck the garden like a dropped glass. Evelyn stepped forward before anyone could stop her. "That means nothing," she said. "People place time capsules under memorials all the time. This entire circus is because of a buried box." Jonathan did not look at her. "Is that what you thought it was?" he asked. This time she did not answer. The foreman reached in carefully once the base had been raised high enough to clear the ground by several inches. What emerged was not decorative. It was a rectangular metal lockbox, matte black, about 18 inches wide and maybe 10 inches deep, its corners sealed in weatherproof tape, its surface scratched but dry. Fresh soil clung to the underside. The box was far too clean to have been buried long. Mr. Wheeler stepped in automatically. "Do not open it barehanded," he said. He removed a pair of nitrile gloves from his pocket and handed them to Jonathan, but Jonathan did not take them. His eyes were fixed on the box. Not on it exactly. Through it. Toward something only he could see. "Set it on the table," he said. The foreman obeyed, carrying the lockbox with both hands to the memorial table where white candles and folded sympathy cards had been arranged in perfect order. The black box looked obscene there, practical and blunt among all the polished grief. Amara felt Miss Ruth's fingers close around her shoulder. Not to hold her back. To steady herself. Jonathan approached the table. Up close, the tape around the edges had been smoothed down with deliberate care. There was no shipping label, no printed mark, only one small thing on top. A square of cream stationery taped flat beneath the dirt, protected under clear plastic. Jonathan reached out at the same time Wheeler said, "Sir, wait." He stopped. Wheeler leaned in, peeled back the plastic carefully, and slid the note free. The paper had Helena's monogram in the lower corner. A simple HM in pale gray ink. Jonathan took it then. The garden had become so silent that the soft crackle of paper unfolding sounded loud. He read the first line without expression. Then he read it again. The muscles in his face did not move, but the color left them all the same. "Jonathan," Evelyn said, and now for the first time there was no polish left in her voice. "Give me that." He lifted his eyes very slowly. No, the single syllable was quiet, but it made even Wheeler shift his stance. Jonathan read the note aloud, not because he wanted the guests to hear, but because he could no longer bear to hear Helena's words only inside his own head. "If this box is being opened, it means somebody placed my memory where my truth was supposed to be." The sentence drifted out into the cold evening air and seemed to change the temperature around everyone who heard it. Amara did not understand everything, but she understood enough. Miss Ruth made a sound like a breath catching on old sorrow. Jonathan looked down at the note again. "The key is in the blue room desk, bottom drawer, taped beneath the false shelf. If Evelyn is present when this is found, do not let her leave before you listen to what is inside." No one moved. Evelyn's hand, which had been resting near the edge of the table, drew back as if the paper itself had turned hot. For a second her face showed something raw and startled, not graceful, not controlled, just naked alarm. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. Jonathan saw it. So did Wheeler. So did Miss Ruth, whose eyes filled with a recognition that looked less like surprise than the painful settling of something she had long suspected but never dared shape into words. "Sir," Wheeler said carefully, I can have someone retrieve the key. Jonathan folded the note once, very precisely, like a man trying to hold himself together through the discipline of his hands. You will do it yourself, he said. And no one goes to that room alone. Wheeler nodded and turned immediately toward the house, selecting 2 guards with a glance. On the terrace, a woman in pearls sank slowly into a chair. One of the investors whispered something to his wife, and she shook her head without taking her eyes off Evelyn. The polished social shell of the evening had split wide open now. Beneath it was not just scandal. It was betrayal. Jonathan laid the note flat on the table and looked at the box as if it were the first honest thing he had seen all day. Open it, Evelyn said suddenly, too fast, too sharp. Open it now and get this over with. Jonathan turned his head toward her. That sounds like urgency, he said. It is grief, she snapped. It is humiliation. It is a child dragging us into fantasy while your guests stand here watching you unravel. Amara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Jonathan's expression did not change. No, he said. What I am watching is a little girl tell the truth while adults panic around it. He looked back at the box. The tape on its lid had a small air bubble under one strip, and for some reason that detail lodged in his mind, the human imperfection of a careful hand working too fast. Helena had packed gifts that way. Documents too. Always neat, almost exact, but never machine perfect. He reached toward the edge of the lid, then stopped when a voice behind him said, "Sir." Wheeler had not returned. This was one of the housemaids, breathless from running but trying not to show it. In her trembling hands, she held a brass key attached to a faded blue ribbon. "We found it," she said. Exactly where the note said. Jonathan took the key without thanking her. Not out of cruelty. Out of shock so deep it had stripped him down to essentials. The brass felt warm from her hand, absurdly ordinary for something that had just reached out of the past and turned the whole estate inside out. He looked once at Helena's photograph beside the candles, then at the black lockbox, then at Amara standing small and still in the shadow of grown people's secrets. "Stay where you are," he said to everyone, but his eyes were on Evelyn when he said it. Then he slid the key into the lock. The brass key resisted for half a second, then turned with a dry mechanical click that seemed far too small for the sound it made inside the garden. Jonathan lifted the lid. Slowly. No one leaned in. No one dared. The air itself felt tightened, as if the whole estate had taken one careful breath and forgotten how to let it go. Inside the lockbox were 4 things, each arranged with the kind of deliberate order that made Jonathan's throat close before his mind could catch up. On top sat a slim digital voice recorder wrapped in a handkerchief he recognized instantly, pale ivory with a stitched blue edge Helena used to carry in her coat pocket on cold days. Beneath it lay a cream envelope sealed with clear tape, a folded set of legal papers inside a waterproof sleeve, and a small USB drive attached to a key ring shaped like a crescent moon. Jonathan did not touch any of it at first. He just stared, his face draining not with confusion now, but with memory. Helena had always organized important things in layers. Every day on top, truth underneath, a soft thing covering a hard one. It was one of 1,000 habits that meant nothing until the person was gone, and then meant everything. "Sir," Wheeler said quietly, returning to the table's edge, "let me log the contents before anyone handles them." Jonathan nodded once without looking up. Wheeler slipped on fresh gloves and began speaking in the low, clipped tone of a man building an official record. 1 digital audio recorder, 1 sealed envelope, 1 packet of legal documents in protective sleeve, 1 USB storage device. Evelyn gave a brittle laugh that convinced no one. "This is absurd. A dead woman leaves keepsakes in a box, and suddenly we are performing an inquest in the middle of a memorial dinner." Jonathan reached for the handkerchief and lifted the recorder from it. "Helena did not leave keepsakes," he said. "She left signals." The recorder was light in his hand, older than the sleek devices people used now, the kind sold for lectures, interviews, private notes. A small piece of white tape had been fixed to the back, and in Helena's handwriting were 3 words, "Play this first." Jonathan closed his eyes for 1 second. Only one. When he opened them, he pressed the power button. The machine beeped softly, sterile and modern against the older, softer sounds of evening settling over the estate. Then came static. Then Helena's voice. "If you are hearing this, Jonathan, then I was right not to trust the room I was living in. The effect of her voice moving through the garden was immediate and almost physical. Several guests flinched. Miss Ruth covered her mouth. Amara felt the tiny hairs lift on her arms, even through the thin fabric of Jonathan's jacket draped around her shoulders. Helena's recorded voice sounded calm, but not relaxed. It was the calm of someone speaking carefully, because she had already learned that carelessness was expensive. I do not know when you will find this, the voice continued, or whether you will still be angry with me when you do. But if the statue is standing above this box, then someone turned my memory into decoration before they were sure my questions were dead. Jonathan stood motionless, except for one finger tightening around the side of the recorder. The guests did not look at him now. They looked at the table, the box, the fading sky, anywhere but directly at the rawness of a man hearing his wife speak from beyond the life he had been told to accept. Helena went on. Do not interrupt this recording, and do not let Evelyn leave before you hear it to the end. There it was again. Clearer now. Not an implication. A name. Evelyn took a quick step backward. Wheeler noticed immediately. So did the guards near the terrace. Jonathan did not turn toward her. He did not need to. The recorder had already done that for him. I wanted to believe I was being paranoid, Helena said. I wanted to believe the changed passwords, the missing files, the quiet conversations that stopped when I entered, all of it had a reasonable explanation. I told myself grief from losing my father had made me suspicious. But then my medical records were altered. Dates changed. Medication notes added that I never approved. And when I asked who authorized access, I was told the request came from inside my own household. A murmur ran through the back of the crowd, quickly swallowed. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He had spent years in boardrooms detecting lies by breath, posture, timing. Yet somehow he had failed to hear fear in the voice closest to him. Helena paused on the recording, and for a second there was only the soft hiss of the device. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. Softer, more tired. Jonathan, if I am wrong, I am sorry for what this will do. But if I am right, then please listen harder than you did when I tried to tell you I felt watched in my own house. That line landed deepest of all, not because it accused him publicly, because it was private. The kind of wound only truth knew where to touch. Jonathan lowered his head slightly, not in shame exactly, but in recognition so sharp it stripped him of defense. He remembered the argument now. Helena standing barefoot in the blue room, late light on the windows, telling him she thought someone had been through her desk. He had kissed her forehead and blamed stress, travel, the estate staff rotation, anything but the possibility that she was seeing something he refused to. He had told her to rest. She had gone quiet after that. Not immediately. Gradually. In all the ways a person stops knocking when no one opens the door. There is more in the envelope, Helena said on the recorder. The legal papers matter. The USB matters more. But first you need to understand this. The statue placement was not my idea. I wrote in my estate notes that I did not want any monument in the South Garden. If one is there, someone put it where this box was hidden on purpose. Wheeler's eyes lifted at once toward the statue still suspended a few inches above the earth by the lift straps. The symbolism of the thing turned ugly all at once. Not tribute, not remembrance. A cover, an elegant weight placed over buried truth. Amara looked at Helena's carved face and suddenly felt sorry for Stone, for how easily adults used beautiful things to make ugly choices look respectable. Evelyn found her voice before anyone else found theirs. This proves nothing, she said, but the confidence was gone. She was unwell near the end. We all know that. She was exhausted, anxious, emotional. Jonathan, you cannot let an old recording rewrite reality. Jonathan turned toward her then. Finally, his face had become so still it no longer looked like composure. It looked like distance, the dangerous kind that opened when trust collapsed too fast for anger to catch up. Reality, he said, is that my dead wife knew where to hide evidence better than the people living in this house knew how to look for it. He placed the recorder on the table with extraordinary care, as if roughness now would be a kind of betrayal. Wheeler reached for the sealed envelope, but Jonathan stopped him with a hand. Not yet. His voice was low, but no one mistook it for hesitation. He looked at Miss Ruth. Did she say anything to you? Anything at all in the weeks before she died that I should have listened to? Miss Ruth's eyes filled instantly. She asked me once if I believed a house could tell when it was no longer safe. she whispered. I thought she meant sadness, sir. I thought she meant grief. Jonathan absorbed that without blinking. Around them, the evening deepened. Lights along the terrace flickered on automatically, warm yellow against the coming blue of dusk. The estate was trying to keep up appearances. The estate did not understand it had already failed. Jonathan placed his hand on the envelope at last. Through the plastic sleeve beneath it, he could see the edge of legal letterhead, signatures, and what looked like a notary seal. Beneath the clear tape sealing the envelope flap was another note in Helena's handwriting, smaller this time, written in the tight, deliberate script she used only when she was fighting fear by forcing order onto a page. It read, "He will believe paper even if he would not believe me." Jonathan stared at that sentence for a long moment, and when he finally lifted the envelope, his hand was steady. It was his breathing that changed. "Open the gates to no one," he said without looking up. "Call my attorney. Call a forensic examiner. And until I say otherwise, this box is the center of my house." Then he slid one finger beneath the taped seal and began to open the envelope Helena had prepared for the version of him she must have feared would only understand the truth once it had been written, hidden, and buried beneath stone. The tape peeled back with a dry whisper, and Jonathan slid the documents from the envelope one page at a time, careful now in a way that had nothing to do with legal procedure and everything to do with the fact that Helena's hands had touched these pages last. The paper was thicker than standard stock, the kind used for filings meant to survive handling, signatures, and storage. At the top of the first page was the letterhead for Mercer Family Holdings. Beneath it, a date from 6 weeks before Helena's death. Jonathan's eyes moved fast at first, then slowed, then stopped entirely. His thumb pressed so hard against the margin that the paper bent. Wheeler took one step closer, but said nothing. The guests on the terrace could not read the page, yet they could read Jonathan, and that was enough. Whatever he had expected to find, it was not this. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. Her voice came out too quickly, too bright, and then turned thin when he did not answer. Jonathan lifted the second page, then the third. Attached behind them was a notarized amendment to Helena's estate directives. He knew the original structure by memory. He had signed related trust paperwork himself years earlier in a quiet office with Helena sitting beside him, one hand around a coffee cup, the other scribbling notes in the margin, because she never liked signing anything she had not read twice. This was different. The amendment transferred discretionary authority over a large charitable foundation from Helena's independent board appointee to a temporary domestic proxy in the event of mental instability, medical decline, or emotional incapacity. Jonathan's gaze fixed on the name of that proxy, Evelyn Shaw. The evening air seemed to leave the garden all at once. He flipped to the signature page. Helena's name was there. Her handwriting, at first glance, elegant, slanted, controlled. But wrong. Not enough for strangers to notice. More than enough for a husband who had watched her sign birthday cards, contracts, school donation checks, and hotel receipts for 12 years. The final stroke on the H dragged too long. The loop in the L pressed too narrow. It was her name wearing someone else's confidence. Jonathan looked up slowly. Evelyn's face had gone very still. "You forged this," he said. The words were not loud. They were worse than loud. They fell clean and flat between them like a blade laid on glass. "That is absurd," Evelyn replied at once. "I did not touch those papers." Helena changed things all the time when she was worried about the future. She did not write like this when she was worried, Jonathan said. She wrote smaller, sharper. She never pulled the last line downward. He held up the page. And she never used incapacity language without a physician review attached. Wheeler extended his hand. "May I?" Jonathan gave him the page. Wheeler scanned it, then the seal, then the witness lines. "One witness is from a notary office in Westchester," he said. "The second signature is a private medical consultant." He turned the page slightly. "Dr. Alan Kessler." At that name, Miss Ruth inhaled sharply. Jonathan heard it. "You know him?" he asked. Miss Ruth hesitated, eyes moving from Jonathan to Evelyn and back again. "He came twice near the end," she said quietly. "Late afternoon. Through the side entrance, not the front. I remember because Miss Helena did not like him. She asked me once why a doctor needed to whisper in a hallway." Jonathan closed his eyes for half a second, and in that brief darkness memories rearranged themselves into something crueler. Helena asking odd questions. Helena suddenly withdrawing from public meetings. Helena canceling a charity dinner she had planned for months. Helena standing in the blue room, saying she felt as if decisions were being made around her instead of with her. He had called it stress. He had called it exhaustion. He had called it the aftermath of grief. He had given every possible explanation except the one she needed him to see. There is more, Wheeler said. Inside the envelope, tucked behind the estate amendment, was a separate packet sealed with a pharmacy stamp and medical release forms. Jonathan took those pages himself. The top sheet listed medication adjustments authorized over a 3-week period. Sedatives, sleep aids, mood stabilizers. The prescribing physician line carried Kessler's name again. The patient acknowledgement line carried Helena's signature. Again wrong. Again almost right. He felt something cold move through his chest. She never took any of these, he said. She would not. She hated anything that fogged her mind. He turned another page. Dosage notes. Refill authorization. Internal communications referencing episodes of distress and family recommendation for monitored rest. Family recommendation. Not physician recommendation. Family. This is why she sounded tired, Miss Ruth whispered. No one answered her. They did not need to. Jonathan could hear Helena's recorded voice all over again. My medical records were altered. Dates changed. Medication notes added that I never approved. The sentence had sounded shocking when he first heard it. Now it sounded precise. The kind of precision only a frightened person builds when they know no one will believe. Anything vague. Evelyn stepped closer to the table, then stopped when the nearest security guard shifted his stance. Jonathan, listen to me, she said. You are misreading this because you want someone to blame. Helena was unraveling. You know she was. She forgot appointments. She cried without reason. She told people strange things. Jonathan looked at her with a steadiness that stripped every soft edge from the evening. Did she cry without reason? He asked. Or did she cry because reason was being buried under her? Evelyn's lips parted, but no answer came. The guests had gone silent again, the kind of silence that no longer belonged to mourning or decorum. This was the silence people made when a respectable life began splitting open at the seams. Amara stood very still under Jonathan's jacket, the sleeves hanging past her fingers. She did not understand the legal language, but she understood the shape of the room now. Grown people were no longer pretending everything was fine. The truth had started making them honest against their will. Wheeler lifted the remaining contents from the envelope. A final sheet, handwritten by Helena on lined paper torn from a legal pad, folded twice. Jonathan took it and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting there was unmistakable, tighter than usual, pressed hard enough to leave marks on the page beneath. Jonathan, he read softly, and even saying his own name in Helena's words seemed to scrape something raw inside him. If you were holding these papers, then I did not imagine what was happening. I copied every document I could before they were taken from my desk. I know Evelyn has been using Dr. Kessler to create a version of me that looks unstable on paper. I do not yet know who else is helping her. I hid this because I was running out of places in my own home that still felt like mine. Jonathan's hand lowered slightly. Around him, the estate lights had come fully on, warm pools against the blue-gray dark settling over the garden. They made the marble look whiter. The dirt looked darker. The box looked final. There is one more thing on the USB, Helena had written. I did not trust paper alone. Paper can be argued with. Voices can be dismissed. But faces, dates, and rooms are harder to explain away. Watch it all the way through. Do not stop when it becomes inconvenient for the living. Jonathan stared at that last line until the words blurred, then sharpened again. Inconvenient for the living. He almost laughed, but grief and disbelief had crowded too close together for the sound to make it out. He folded the note once and slipped it back into the envelope, not to hide it, but to keep it whole. Then he turned to Wheeler. Bring a laptop. Here. Now. Wheeler nodded immediately and signaled one of the guards toward the house. Evelyn drew in a breath that sounded almost like panic. This is madness, she said. You are going to play some edited file in front of half the city? Jonathan did not look at her. No, he said. I am going to play what my wife thought I would only believe if I saw it with my own eyes. He placed the forged papers beside the recorder, the handwritten note on top, and for one strange suspended moment the memorial table held two versions of Helena at once. The polished photograph smiling in silver frame, and the frightened, methodical woman who had written from inside a house she no longer trusted. Amara watched Jonathan's face and saw something important changing in it. He was not only shocked now. He was ashamed. Not the shallow shame of public embarrassment. The heavier kind. The kind that comes when a person realizes love had asked them to listen, and they had answered with comfort instead. The laptop arrived within a minute, opened on the table under the terrace lights. Wheeler put on fresh gloves, lifted the USB drive from the lockbox, and held it for Jonathan to see before inserting it into the side port. A folder appeared on the screen. Just one, labeled in Helena's plain, exact typing. If he still doubts me. Jonathan stared at the words for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, play it. The laptop screen brightened against the deepening evening like a window opening inside another truth. Wheeler clicked the folder once. Inside were 5 files, each stamped with a date and time. The earliest one was from 3 weeks before Helena died. The latest was from 4 days before. Jonathan stood so still he seemed carved from the same cold certainty as the statue hanging inches above the ground behind him. Play the first one, he said. Wheeler obeyed. The video opened with a grainy view of the blue room upstairs, angled from a bookshelf toward Helena's writing desk and the French windows beyond. The afternoon sun in the recording was warm and gold, falling across the rug in long clean bars. Helena stepped into frame a second later, holding papers in one hand and her phone in the other. She was not dressed like someone unraveling. She looked composed, if tired, in a cream sweater and dark slacks, her hair pinned back loosely as if she had been working for hours. She sat at the desk, opened a drawer, removed a folder, and began comparing pages. Then the room's door opened without a knock. Evelyn entered. Even on video, she carried herself like a person who assumed every room would adjust to her presence. You should not be up here by yourself, she said. Her voice came through the laptop speakers clear enough to pull a visible reaction from the guests still standing at the terrace edge. Helena did not look surprised. That was what made it worse. She looked prepared. I am by myself because I prefer it, she answered. Evelyn smiled, but it was the kind that belonged to private pressure, not kindness. Dr. Kessler thinks isolation is making you worse. Helena kept sorting papers. Dr. Kessler has never examined me without first speaking to you in the hallway. Jonathan's fingers tightened against the edge of the table. The video continued. Evelyn walked farther into the room and stopped beside the desk, careful not to touch anything on camera, careful in a way that only looked careful once someone had a reason to notice it. You are overtired, she said. You are suspicious. Everyone around you sees it. Helena looked up then, and even through the screen Jonathan felt the force of the look she gave. Not hysterical, not unstable, furious, clear, and exhausted by being spoken around. No, Helena said. Everyone around me is being taught to see it. A ripple moved through the garden. Someone on the terrace whispered, My God. Evelyn's recorded expression shifted by less than an inch. You are making this harder than it needs to be. Helena slid one paper across the desk. Then explain why my foundation authority was reassigned on a draft I never approved. Evelyn glanced down. Too quickly. That is a contingency measure. It is a theft measure, Helena replied. And if Jonathan sees it, he will know the signature is wrong. At that, Evelyn laughed softly, but there was no amusement in it. Jonathan sees what makes his life easier. The sentence hit the present moment like a slap made of silk. Jonathan did not move, but the people closest to him felt something go colder around him. Amara looked up at his face and saw no anger there yet, just a wound turning its head toward the light. In the video, Helena rose from the desk. Get out of my room, she said. Evelyn tilted her head. It stopped being only your room when your judgment became a household concern. Helena's mouth parted as if she could not quite believe the audacity of hearing her own life described that way. Then she said very quietly, You are building paperwork around me because you know lies sound respectable when they were letterhead. Wheeler paused the video without being asked. The screen froze on Helena standing beside the desk, one hand flat against the wood. Her expression sharpened into something between grief and disbelief. No one in the garden spoke. The terrace lights glowed warm over faces that had lost all appetite for politeness. Jonathan did not blink for several seconds. Then he said, Play the next one. Wheeler clicked the second file. This one showed the downstairs west hallway outside Jonathan's study. The angle was lower, likely from a decorative camera hidden among the shelves. The timestamp read 10:14 p.m. Helena was not in frame at first. Evelyn was. She stood with Dr. Kessler near the study door, her voice lowered, though the audio still caught enough. The records need to match the pattern, she said. If she questions the dosage again, note agitation. If she refuses, note refusal to comply. Kessler adjusted his glasses. I need Mercer's signature on at least one family review request. Evelyn answered without hesitation. You will have it. He signs faster when he is tired. Wheeler stopped the playback. The quiet that followed felt different from shock. Shock had edges. This was heavier. This was the sinking recognition of a trap built slowly by confident hands. Jonathan lowered his gaze to the sealed medical packet on the table, then back to the frozen screen. He remembered signing forms on his tablet during flights, in back seats, between meetings, trusting summaries, trusting staff, trusting structure, trusting the architecture of his own life because he had built companies on systems and believed systems could not be intimate enough to betray him. He had never asked who drafted the family review forms. Never asked why Helena had grown quiet whenever Kessler's name came up. Never asked why Evelyn seemed to have an answer prepared before a question fully formed. Keep going, he said. Evelyn stepped forward so suddenly the nearest guard blocked her path on instinct. No, she said. This is selective. This is edited. Jonathan, you cannot let dead files accuse living people without context. He turned toward her at last. Context, he said, and now there was something almost weightless in his voice. The dangerous calm of a man moving past disbelief into conclusion. You were just given context by your own mouth. Her breath caught. Not loudly, but Amara heard it. Children heard things adults thought were too small to matter. Wheeler opened the third file. This one was brief. Helena sat close to the camera, likely knowing exactly where it was hidden. Her face filled the frame, pale from lack of sleep, eyes steady in a way that made everyone watching lean closer without meaning to. If you are seeing this, she said, then he still trusts printed lies more than the woman who shared his house. So here is the plain version. Evelyn is trying to move my authority, isolate me medically, and make my fear look clinical. If Jonathan is standing there when this plays, then Jonathan, I need you to hear one thing without interrupting yourself with logic. I am not confused. I am cornered. The file ended there. No music. No dramatic finish. Just the screen going black for a second before returning to the folder list. Jonathan's hand found the edge of the table and held it. Miss Ruth began to cry very softly, not with noise, just with tears slipping down an old face that had spent too long watching a good woman become lonely in her own home. Amara did not look away from Jonathan. She thought grown men who owned large houses would look bigger in moments like this. He did not. He looked more human, more breakable. Wheeler swallowed once and moved the cursor to the fourth file, but before he could click it, Jonathan said, "Wait." The word stopped everything. He looked at the screen, then at the envelope, then at the half-lifted statue behind them, the straps still holding stone above the earth that had tried to keep Helena's truth hidden. I want every person here to understand something, he said, not raising his voice. A little girl heard what adults ignored. She saw what wealth stepped around. And my wife, who should have been safest in this house, had to bury proof under a monument because no room inside these walls was honest anymore. His gaze shifted to Amara then, and for the first time since the evening broke open, there was warmth in it, fragile but real. You did not imagine this, he said. Amara nodded once, though her throat felt tight. Evelyn looked from Jonathan to the screen to the guests and seemed to realize all at once that whatever control she had depended on silence, and silence had ended the moment a child spoke aloud in the garden. Wheeler's cursor hovered over the fourth file. The timestamp on that one was from the night before Helena died. Jonathan drew in a slow breath, the kind a person takes before opening a door they already know they should have opened sooner. Play it, he said. The fourth file opened in silence. No hallway this time. No bookshelf angle. The camera faced the blue room directly, but the image shook for the first 2 seconds as if Helena herself had placed it there with unsteady hands. Then it settled. The timestamp in the corner read 11:38 p.m. Rain tapped softly against the French windows, turning the glass into black mirrors streaked with silver. Only one lamp was on in the room, low and amber, leaving the edges in shadow and the center warm enough to look almost safe. Helena stepped into frame wearing a dark robe over a pale night dress, her hair loose now, one side tucked behind her ear the way she did when she was thinking faster than she could speak. She looked tired, yes, but not confused, not unstable. She looked like a woman who had run out of easy ways to make other people hear her. She closed the door behind her, crossed to the desk, and sat down without taking off her robe. For a second, she only breathed. Then she looked straight into the camera. "If this is the one he watches last," she said, "then that figures." A few people on the terrace shifted uneasily. Even now, even after everything, Helena still sounded like herself. Dry, sharp, too perceptive for her own peace. Jonathan did not move. Helena folded her hands on the desk. "Jonathan, if you are seeing this, then you waited for proof again. Paper, footage, something you could point to, something cleaner than instinct." Her eyes lowered for a moment, then lifted again. "I loved that about you once. The way you refused to panic. The way you only moved when the facts were solid. It made the world feel less chaotic. But that same habit became a wall in this house. I kept knocking on it, and you kept asking me for better evidence." Jonathan's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. Nobody did. The rain in the recording went on tapping softly against the windows, a small patient sound that made Helena's voice feel even lonelier. "I tried to show you gently," she continued. "I tried to say I felt watched. I tried to tell you my desk had been opened, my files moved, my calendar altered. I tried to ask why Evelyn knew things I had not told her. Every time, you gave me a reasonable answer. You wrapped reason around me so neatly, I almost mistook it for safety." Miss Ruth bowed her head. Amara watched Jonathan's profile and saw the truth of those words land in him one layer at a time. Not dramatically, not all at once. Like cold water finding cracks in stone. Helena reached to the side of the desk and lifted a small notebook into frame. Its navy cover was worn at the edges. "I made copies of dates, medications, changes, signatures. If this notebook is missing by the time this plays, then someone searched harder than I expected. If it is still where I left it, then maybe I am the only one in this house who still understands how much danger can hide in ordinary rooms." She set the notebook down again, just outside the camera's lower edge. "I do not think Evelyn acts alone," she said then, and the room seemed to contract around the sentence. On the terrace, someone drew in breath. Helena kept going. "I think she is ambitious, yes. I think she is patient. I think she knows exactly how to make control sound like concern. But patience like hers usually travels with permission, money, access, the confidence of someone who believes a powerful man will dismiss discomfort if it arrives wearing enough polish." Jonathan's eyes flicked once toward Evelyn. She had gone pale under the terrace lights. But it was not the pale softness of fear alone. It was calculation collapsing. Helena looked tired in the video now, but not physically. More like she was exhausted from translating her own reality into terms other people might finally respect. "This is what I know," she said. "The medical changes were not mistakes. The legal amendment was not accidental. The household staff has been divided on purpose. People are being made to think I am fragile so that when I object, objection itself becomes evidence against me." Her voice dropped lower. "And if something happens to me suddenly, if there is a neat explanation prepared too quickly, if grief is organized before questions are allowed to breathe, do not accept that neatness. It will not be truth. It will be timing." The word timing seemed to echo in the present garden too, because everyone standing there understood at once what had happened that day. The swift memorial planning, the statue placement, the polish ceremony, the way remembrance had arrived, already arranged. Helena leaned closer to the camera then, and for the first time there was visible hurt in her face. Not panic. Hurt. "Jonathan, there is one thing I need you to hear without defending yourself in your head while I say it. You did not betray me because you stopped loving me. You betrayed me because you trusted comfort more than warning. You trusted the person who kept things smooth over the person who kept things true." Jonathan's fingers tightened around the table edge until the knuckles showed white. Amara did not fully understand all the adult meanings in that sentence, but she understood enough to know it was the kind of truth that did not shout because it did not need to. Helena exhaled, long and tired. "If I am wrong, I will hate that I turned my home into a file archive. But if I am right, then someone is going to try to make memory replace accountability. They will frame me beautifully. They will speak softly. They will say how tragic it all was. And then, they will move on. Outside the recording, the actual garden around the table had become exactly what Helena described. Beautifully framed, softly lit, full of tragedy arranged for public consumption. The cruelty of that symmetry settled over everyone at once. Helena glanced toward the room's door, as if she had heard something outside. When she looked back, her voice had changed. It was gentler now, almost breaking. If you ever find this because somebody small noticed what somebody powerful ignored, believe the small one first. The sentence passed through the terrace and the garden and seemed to stop directly in front of Amara. Miss Ruth made a sound between a sob and a prayer. Jonathan looked at Amara then, and whatever he felt in that moment was too large to fit on his face without cracking it. Helena gave the faintest smile into the camera. The tired kind people save for when hope feels foolish, but they offer it anyway. Truth does not always arrive through the front door, Jonathan, she said. Sometimes it comes in through the part of the house nobody important is watching. The video ended there. No footsteps. No interruption. Just Helena's face fading to black as the screen returned to the folder list. For a long moment nobody moved. The rain from the recording was gone, but the real evening wind had picked up, moving through the roses and the linen draped over the memorial chairs with a low restless hush. Jonathan stood as if rooted to the stone beneath him. Evelyn opened her mouth once, then closed it. Her usual instinct, to step into silence and shape it, had failed her. There was no smooth version of this left to build. Wheeler stared at the blank screen, then at the files still remaining in the folder. There is one more, he said quietly. Jonathan did not answer at first. His eyes had shifted beyond the laptop now, beyond the table, beyond the half-lifted statue and the guests and the lights. He was looking at the architecture of his own blindness, all of it suddenly visible. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and stripped of everything but fact. Play the last file. The last file opened on a black screen for 3 full seconds, long enough for the garden to feel its own silence. Then the image came into focus. It was the south garden itself, viewed from an upper window at an angle that caught the rear terrace steps, the stone path, and the exact place where Helena's statue now hung suspended above disturbed earth. The timestamp read 12:17 a.m., the night before Helena died. Rain had stopped by then, but the ground still held a wet shine under the garden lights, every hedge dark and glossy, every puddle reflecting gold. The footage was quieter than the others. No room tone, no lamp hum, just distance and night. For the first few seconds nothing happened. Then a side door opened at the back of the house, and 2 figures stepped out. One wore a long pale coat. The other carried a rectangular object with both hands. Wheeler leaned closer to the screen. "Can you enlarge it?" Jonathan asked. Wheeler tapped the trackpad, bringing the frame tighter. The image softened with zoom, but not enough to hide what mattered. The pale coat was Evelyn. The way she moved gave her away before the face did. Precise, quick, irritated by inconvenience. Beside her was Dr. Kessler, hatless in the damp cold, shoulders hunched as he helped carry the lockbox across the path toward the flower bed where the statue base would later be placed. No one in the garden breathed normally after that. The proof was no longer interpretive. It was physical, dated, placed, undeniable. On the screen, Evelyn stopped near the open patch of ground and looked back toward the house before speaking. The camera did not catch every word, but the night carried enough. "It has to be under before sunrise," she said. Kessler answered, lower. "If he finds out about the transfer before the board vote, this falls apart." Evelyn replied at once. "Then he will not find out." Jonathan's face did not move. That frightened Amara more than shouting would have. On the screen, Kessler crouched and lowered the box into the shallow pit. Evelyn knelt beside him, one cream heel pressing into the mud, exactly where Amara had later seen the fresh disturbance. She took something from her pocket, bent over the box, and taped it to the lid. The note, the one they had already read. Helena's note. Only now the terrible logic of it settled into place. Helena had buried the truth, and Evelyn, having found it, had not destroyed it. She had covered it, hidden it. Under the future monument, confident grief would protect what malice wanted buried. "Pause," Jonathan said. Wheeler did. The frozen frame showed Evelyn half kneeling, face turned in profile toward Kessler, the black box below her hands. Jonathan stared at the image for a long moment. She knew about the note, he said quietly. She put the statue there because she found the box and thought weight would do the rest. Wheeler nodded once. That is what it looks like, sir. No, Jonathan said, still staring at the screen. That is what it is. Wheeler resumed playback. On screen, Evelyn stood and wiped her hands with a cloth. Kessler filled in the edges of the pit with his shoe, then looked uneasy, glancing toward the house. This is too much, he muttered. If she kept copies elsewhere. Evelyn cut him off. She did not have time. He hesitated. And Mercer? Evelyn gave a small, cold smile even through the blurred zoom. Jonathan trusts sequence. Illness, stress, withdrawal, memorial. He will follow the path that is laid in front of him. That line changed the garden again. It was not just betrayal. It was contempt. She had not merely deceived him. She had studied the shape of his trust and built a road through it. Miss Ruth turned away, pressing trembling fingers to her lips. One of the investors on the terrace muttered, "Unbelievable," but the words sounded too small, too cheap, for what everyone was witnessing. In the video, Evelyn and Kessler began walking back toward the house. Then Evelyn stopped. She looked over her shoulder one last time at the patch of turned soil and said, clearly this time, "By tomorrow, nobody will look under anything. They will only look up." The file ended there. The black screen returned, reflecting the terrace lights, and the stunned faces gathered around the table. For one stretched second, no one spoke. Then Jonathan exhaled. Not sharply, not theatrically, just once, like a man setting down the last excuse he had left. He turned from the laptop and looked at the actual statue hanging above the actual hole, the straps creaking faintly in the evening wind. Helena had been right about all of it. The timing, the paperwork, the neatness, the monument, the way grief had been arranged before truth could breathe. And somewhere inside that realization was something even harder to hold. She had known. He might fail her, and still she had left a path back. Not for revenge, for recognition. Jonathan finally looked at Evelyn. She seemed smaller now, though nothing about her posture had changed. The elegance was still there, the expensive coat, the bracelet catching warm terrace light, the polished hair, the controlled mouth. But control without belief looked thin. You used my wife's death as staging, he said. Evelyn swallowed. Jonathan, listen to yourself. That footage does not show what you think it shows. It shows you burying a box under the place where you later installed her statue. It shows a conversation without context. Then give me the context, he said. His voice never rose. It did not need to. Explain why Dr. Kessler helped you place hidden evidence beneath a memorial site after midnight. Explain why Helena's signatures are wrong. Explain why her records changed. Explain why every version of concern in this house somehow ended with your name on authority and her name on instability. Evelyn opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. That frightened her more than accusation. She had always lived by the speed of her own answers. Tonight, truth had made her late. I was protecting this family, she said at last. Jonathan's expression did not shift. From whom? Silence. Wheeler stepped slightly closer, not touching her, just making the perimeter real. Jonathan looked past Evelyn to Kessler, who had gone ashen under the garden lights. And you? Jonathan said. Did you bill concern by the hour, or was fraud included? Kessler looked as if he might speak, then lowered his eyes instead. That told its own story. Amara stood very still beneath Jonathan's borrowed jacket, the cuffs brushing her knees. She could feel the whole night changing shape, could feel adults losing the polished words they usually hid inside. Jonathan turned then, unexpectedly, not to Wheeler, not to the guests, but to Amara. His gaze softened in a way that made the rest of his face look newly tired. You heard something none of us did, he said. You looked where none of us looked. Amara's throat tightened. She held the loose ribbon in both hands and answered honestly. It sounded lonely, she said. Several adults blinked at that, confused by the child's wording, but Jonathan was not confused. He looked at the box, the recorder, the papers, the screen, the half-lifted statue, and understood exactly what she meant. Truth had been under stone, under speeches, under flowers, under money, under timing. And it had sounded lonely because no one with power had been willing to kneel down and listen. Jonathan faced Wheeler again. Call the police, he said. Call the board. Call every attorney on retainer. Lock down every office, every device, every private file tied to Helena's estate, foundation, and medical record. Wheeler nodded immediately. Jonathan's eyes never left Evelyn as he added, and no one leaves this property without my permission. The wind moved through the garden, carrying the scent of wet soil and roses, lifting the edge of the linen cloth beside Helena's framed photograph. For the first time all evening, the memorial no longer felt false. Not because it had become beautiful again, because it had stopped pretending. Jonathan stepped to the table and took Helena's handwritten note in his hand once more. His thumb rested over the line she had written about paper, voices, and rooms. Then he looked up at the guests, the staff, the guards, and the little girl who had broken open the evening with one quiet sentence. My wife was telling the truth, he said. And tonight, a child made sure the rest of us had to hear it. The first siren arrived as a distant thread of sound beyond the iron gates, too far away to break the stillness, and yet impossible to mistake once it had entered the night. Nobody in the garden moved toward it. Nobody relaxed. The Mercer estate had become a place where waiting itself felt sharp. Wheeler was already on his phone in a low voice, coordinating access points, preserving camera archives, dispatching staff away from the Blue Room and every office tied to Helena's records. 2 guards had positioned themselves near Evelyn and Dr. Kessler without touching either of them, close enough to make freedom feel theoretical. Jonathan stood at the memorial table beneath the terrace lights, one hand resting near the lockbox, the other holding Helena's folded note. The paper looked small in his grip, too small for what it had just done to the shape of his life. Amara remained beside Miss Ruth, the white ribbon still looped in her fingers, Jonathan's jacket warm around her shoulders and too long in the sleeves. She could smell his cologne faintly in the cloth, something dry and expensive that now carried the colder scent of night air and turned soil. The statue still hung above the open space where the box had been hidden, suspended by straps like a truth caught mid-rise. We should lower it, the foreman said quietly, almost apologetically, as if even practical matters now needed permission to exist. Jonathan looked at the marble face of Helena and shook his head once. Not yet. His voice was calm, but calm had changed meaning in this garden. Earlier it had meant control. Now it meant the dangerous focus of a man sorting memory from illusion in real time. Evelyn tried again, because people like her always tried again. She took one careful breath, reassembled her expression, and stepped into the silence as if it might still obey her. Jonathan, she said, softer now, almost intimate, the tone designed for private rooms and strategic forgiveness. You are making decisions in front of witnesses because you are hurt. I understand that. Anyone would be hurt. But once officers arrive, this stops being grief and starts becoming spectacle. Think about Helena. Think about what she would have wanted. Miss Ruth turned her head at that, and the look she gave Evelyn held more years than anger. Jonathan did not answer immediately. He let the words sit in the air until their shape showed itself. Then he said, "The person in this garden who has spoken least about what Helena wanted is you." Evelyn's face hardened by a degree so small most would have missed it. Amara did not miss it. Children noticed when grown-ups stopped pretending to be kind. Dr. Kessler found his voice next, though he sounded like a man borrowing confidence from a room that no longer believed him. Mr. Mercer, with respect, recordings can be misleading. Medical documentation is more complex than a family member understands at first glance. I can explain the context to the authorities when they arrive. Jonathan turned toward him with a kind of stillness that made the doctor's last words sound foolish in its own wake. Context, Jonathan said. You altered records, signed off on conditions my wife did not have, and stood in my garden at midnight helping bury the proof beneath future stone. You may save your explanations for people paid to document lies professionally. Kessler's mouth closed. One of the terrace guests let out a breath that almost sounded like relief. The rich were never more fascinated than when another rich person was finally spoken to without social cushioning. Wheeler returned from the side path carrying a slim leather folio and handed it to Jonathan. Initial archive copies are secure, sir, he said. Household staff have been separated by role and kept away from private offices. The board chair is returning my call. The police are 6 minutes out. Jonathan nodded, then opened the folio. Inside was a printed summary from the estate server logs Wheeler's team had pulled in the last few minutes. He scanned one page, then another, his expression flattening further. "What is this?" Wheeler answered immediately. "Remote access logs to Helena Mercer's foundation account and document vault. Repeated access from an internal residential terminal over the last month. The terminal assigned to the south sitting room. Evelyn's sitting room. The one she used for calls, floral arrangements, and the performance of harmlessness." Jonathan looked up at her slowly. "Did you work from there because the room looked less guilty?" She swallowed and said nothing. Silence had finally found her before strategy could. Jonathan looked back at the page. "And this?" Wheeler glanced down. "Outgoing transfer drafts. None completed, but all prepared. Staged to move administrative control after a 90-day incapacity trigger." Miss Ruth closed her eyes. Amara did not understand the legal structure, but she understood theft when adults used softer words for it. The sirens were louder now, nearer, cut briefly by the buzz of the front gate opening under guard instruction. At the same moment, the board chair called back. Wheeler answered, listened, then passed the phone to Jonathan without a word. Jonathan put it to his ear. "This is Mercer." He listened, eyes fixed not on Evelyn but on the ground beneath the statue. "No. Do not postpone anything. Freeze the foundation, every discretionary vote, every amended proxy. Effective immediately." He listened again. "Because the amendment is fraudulent, the witness chain is compromised, and if you move $1 before the authorities review what I am looking at, I will hold every member personally liable." A pause. "That is not a threat. That is me saving you the embarrassment of pretending you were not warned." He ended the call and handed the phone back. Some men became louder when they lost trust. Jonathan Mercer became cleaner. Every sentence shed comfort on the way out. Amara felt Miss Ruth squeeze her shoulder once. Gently, the way a person might touch something steady in order to keep from shaking. "Mr. Mercer," Miss Ruth said then, her voice thin but upright. "There is one thing I never told you because I thought it would sound silly after Miss Helena passed." Jonathan looked at her at once. "Say it now." She glanced toward the blue room windows above, where only darkness showed. "The week before she died, she asked me to move her winter scarves out of the cedar chest, because she said if anything happened too quickly, scent would matter." I did not understand her. I thought grief had made her strange. But one scarf was tied around the notebook she mentioned just now. I found it the day after we lost her. The notebook was gone. Only the scarf remained. Jonathan said nothing, but something changed behind his eyes. "What scarf?" he asked. Miss Ruth pointed to the handkerchief that had wrapped the recorder. "That color. The pale blue edge. She used that color when she wanted me to notice something without speaking in front of other people." Wheeler turned slightly. "Then someone searched the blue room after that video was made and removed the notebook." "Not someone," Jonathan said. He looked at Evelyn. "The same person who thought burying truth beneath tribute was elegant." Evelyn's composure finally cracked around the edges. "You are building a story because you need one," she said, but the sentence came out tired now, unconvincing even to her. "No," Jonathan replied. "My wife built the story. You just left fingerprints on every chapter." The first officer entered the garden then, hat in hand, posture professional, followed by 2 detectives in dark jackets and 1 forensic technician wheeling a case over the gravel path. The guests drew back instinctively. Official presence changed rich air faster than weather. One detective, a woman in her 40s with a lined face and alert, unsentimental eyes, took in the suspended statue, the lockbox, the laptop, the staff, the guests, the guarded suspects, and the little girl in an oversized suit jacket in one sweep. "Who made the call?" she asked. "I did," Jonathan said. He stepped forward, not as host now, but as witness. "My name is Jonathan Mercer. The evidence is here. The recordings are here. The forged documents are here. And the child who heard what the rest of us ignored is standing right there." Every head turned toward Amara for a second. She almost shrank back, but Jonathan did something no one expected. He moved to the side instead of standing over her, lowering himself into the line of her height without kneeling completely, as if understanding at last that truth had not arrived from below because it was smaller, but because everyone powerful had refused to bend. "Her name is Amara Brooks," he said. "She is the reason none of this remains buried." The detective's gaze softened for only a heartbeat before returning to the table. Then let us start with what was found. Jonathan placed Helena's note carefully beside the lockbox and looked once at the open ground beneath the raised monument. The night air had gone colder. The roses smelled sharper now, almost green. Above them, Helena's stone likeness waited in silence while the real version of her, the one made of warnings and patience and buried proof, finally began to be heard by people whose job it was not to be charmed by appearances. Jonathan straightened and gave the detective the sentence the whole estate had been resisting since afternoon. My wife was telling the truth, he said, and this house helped hide it. Detective Lena Ortiz did not waste words, and the Mercer Garden was no place for wasted words anymore. Within minutes, the memorial table had become an evidence station under portable lights clipped to black stands, their white beams flattening shadows and turning the lockbox, recorder, documents, and laptop into objects stripped of ceremony. The forensic technician photographed everything before touching it. Wheeler handed over archive copies. The guests, once arranged by social importance, had been quietly separated into clusters along the terrace by officers who cared nothing for influence, and even less for discomfort. Evelyn stood near the stone path with one guard to her left and another to her right, her cream coat buttoned high against the cold, as if elegance could still function as armor. Dr. Kessler kept dabbing at the corner of his mouth with a folded handkerchief, though there was no sweat left to wipe. Amara sat now on the edge of a wrought iron bench under Miss Ruth's watch, Jonathan's jacket still around her shoulders, the sleeves gathered in her lap, like borrowed certainty. She had never seen so many adults move carefully around truth once it stopped sounding like a rumor. Detective Ortiz listened to Jonathan first, not because he was powerful, but because he was the reporting witness and the estate was his. He spoke in the clean, pared-down way Crisis had carved out of him, giving timelines, names, access points, dates on the recordings, the location of the box, the forged documents, the estate amendment, the medical records, the footage of Evelyn and Kessler in the garden after midnight. He did not embellish. He did not dramatize. The facts were already dramatic enough. When he finished, Ortiz turned to Amara. The entire garden seemed to notice the shift. Important men in expensive coats fell quiet because a detective was about to ask a 9-year-old black girl to say aloud what none of them had noticed until it embarrassed them to admit it. Ortiz crouched so her face was level with Amara's. "You are Amara Brooks?" she asked. Amara nodded. "Yes, ma'am. You are not in trouble. I just need you to tell me what you heard and what you found, in your own words." Miss Ruth started to answer on the child's behalf, but Jonathan spoke gently without taking his eyes off Amara. "Let her tell it." Amara swallowed and looked at the detective, then at the open patch beneath the suspended statue, then back again. "Last night, I was waiting by the back hall, while Miss Ruth finished in the kitchen," she said. "I heard a clunk outside, like metal hitting something hard, and then sliding. I looked through the garden door window. I saw a light move near the statue place, but then it went off." Ortiz nodded once, not rushing her. "And this morning? The dirt looked new. Not garden new. Dug new. And I found a ribbon in the mud and a silver swan charm." She lifted the white ribbon from her lap, as if proof still needed hands. "Then when Mr. Mercer pulled the cloth off the statue, I thought about the sound again, and I knew something was under it." Ortiz's expression did not soften into pity. That was why Amara liked her immediately. The detective listened as if the child's observation were not cute, not miraculous, just valid. "Why did you decide to speak right then?" Ortiz asked. Amara hesitated. The answer felt strange in her own mouth, because it felt wrong to let everybody clap over it. A silence followed that sentence, but not the uncomfortable kind. This one settled deeper. Jonathan looked away for a moment, not from shame alone this time, but from the painful accuracy of what a child had understood before any adult in the garden did. Ortiz straightened and wrote a few notes. Then she looked at Jonathan. "She has an ear for detail," she said. "So did my grandmother. People ignore that in children because they mistake size for reliability." Jonathan nodded slowly. "I know." The 3 words came out rougher than anything else he had said all night. Not because they were defensive, because they arrived too late. On the terrace, officers had begun quietly collecting guest names and phone numbers. One of the board members, a man who had spent the earlier part of the evening carefully not choosing a side, now stood near a stone column looking as if he wished the column might open and let him disappear into it. Wheeler approached Ortiz with a tablet showing the access logs he had printed and backed up. "Detective, there is one more layer," he said. "The internal terminal access from the south sitting room coincides with outbound drafts to transfer temporary foundation authority after a 90-day incapacity trigger." Ortiz took the tablet, scanned the data, then lifted her gaze toward Evelyn. "Did you have authorized access to Helena Mercer's foundation account?" Evelyn's chin lifted by instinct. "I had household privileges and calendar oversight." Helena was overwhelmed. "I was helping maintain order." "That is not what I asked." Ortiz's tone did not sharpen. It did not need to. "Did you have authorized access to her foundation account?" Evelyn held the detective's stare for a second too long. "I had access where I needed it." Wheeler made a low sound that was almost a humorless laugh. "That would be a no." Jonathan did not speak, but his eyes moved once toward the suspended statue and then back to Evelyn, as if every answer now had to pass through what she had tried to bury. Ortiz turned to Kessler next. "Doctor, did you prescribe or authorize the medications listed in this packet?" He adjusted his tie, though it no longer sat straight. "I signed what I believe to be appropriate based on reported symptoms and family concerns." "Did you personally evaluate Helena Mercer each time?" Kessler hesitated. "That was enough." Ortiz wrote something down. "Did you ever verify that the patient consent signatures were authentic?" Another hesitation. A longer one. "I relied on the domestic file chain." Meaning the forms were provided through household administration. "By whom?" Kessler's eyes flickered, just once, toward Evelyn. The movement was tiny. The effect was enormous. In that instant, the entire performance of uncertainty collapsed into hierarchy, access, and choice. Miss Ruth turned her face away again, tears shining under the portable lights. Amara sat very still. She was learning something no child should have to learn this young, that grown people with money often use softer words when they wanted ugly things to sound acceptable. Household administration, family concern, temporary authority, context. Every phrase had been a curtain. Tonight, all of them were being pulled open. Detective Ortiz looked at Jonathan. "I will need the blue room sealed and searched before dawn. No one enters except my team. I also want every device used by household administration, every schedule change, every pharmacy communication, and every security override connected to this property in the last 60 days. "You will have them," Jonathan said at once. "And the south sitting room?" Ortiz asked. Jonathan gave Wheeler the slightest nod. "Already locked." The detective closed her notebook for a moment and studied Jonathan in the full light now, as if measuring whether he understood the weight of what came next. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "from this point on, this is no longer about suspicions inside a family. It is about document fraud, unlawful access, evidence concealment, and potentially more, depending on what the medical review finds. Are you prepared to make a formal statement against the people involved, regardless of their relationship to you?" The question did not shock the garden. It finalized it. Jonathan did not answer immediately. He looked past the detective to Helena's photograph on the memorial table, silver-framed, and smiling in a version of life before the house had become something she needed to outweed. Then he looked at the actual evidence lying under white light, where sympathy cards had sat an hour earlier. Finally, he looked at Amara, small on the bench, clutching a muddy ribbon no one powerful had seen until she held it up in front of them. "Yes," he said. There was no tremor in it. "I was not prepared when she needed me to be. I will not fail her again because it is inconvenient for the living." The sentence moved through the garden like a shift in weather. Even Evelyn stopped trying to speak over it. Ortiz nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and reopened her notebook. "Then we proceed." An officer approached quietly to say that the search team was ready for the blue room. Wheeler moved to go with them, but Jonathan stopped him with a glance. "Stay here," he said. Wheeler did not argue. Jonathan turned instead to Miss Ruth. "Would you go with Detective Ortiz's team and show them exactly where Helena kept her desk, scarves, and personal files?" Miss Ruth pressed trembling fingers to her chest, startled by being asked rather than instructed. "Yes, sir," she said softly. Then she looked at Amara, uncertain. Before she could speak, Jonathan stepped toward the bench and crouched in front of the little girl again. Up close, the hardness had gone out of his face, replaced by something quieter and more difficult to look at. Respect, regret, gratitude arriving too late to spare anyone pain, but arriving honestly all the same. You do not have to say anything else tonight unless they ask, he told her. You have already done more than anyone here had the courage to do. Amara looked at him for a second, then at the statue behind him, still hanging between earth and air. Is she mad at you? She asked. The question was so simple it made several adults inhale sharply. Jonathan did not flinch from it. He turned his head once toward Helena's photograph, then back. I think, he said carefully, she was hurt by me, and she still left the truth where I could find it. Amara thought about that, about people leaving truth behind even when they had reasons not to, about lonely sounds under stone, about all the grown-ups who had clapped before they listened. Then she handed Jonathan the white ribbon she had been holding since the beginning. Then do not cover it up again, she said. He took the ribbon like it weighed more than paper should. I will not, he said. And in the cold white light of evidence lamps, with officers moving toward the blue room and the memorial split open into fact, that promise sounded less like grief and more like the first honest thing the house had heard in a very long time. By the time Detective Ortiz's team disappeared into the house, the Mercer estate no longer felt like a place built for comfort. It felt like a body holding its breath. Portable lights cast hard white pools across the garden, turning every polished surface into something colder than wealth usually allowed. The guests who had not already been escorted to the terrace remained there in uneasy quiet, gathered in expensive coats and evening shoes, no longer speaking in gossip but in fragments, as if full sentences might make them participants instead of witnesses. The suspended statue still hung over the open ground, straps tight, marble pale against the night. Helena's carved face looked distant now, almost offended by the performance that had been built around her. Jonathan stood near the evidence table with the white ribbon folded once in his hand. He had not realized he was still holding it until Wheeler glanced down at it, and then away again. A child's ribbon, mud at one end. Ordinary, more honest than every speech given before sunset. Minutes passed, then more. The house glowed behind them, row after row of lit windows in warm amber squares, but no one in the garden mistook that warmth for peace. Upstairs, officers were moving through the blue room, the south sitting room, Helena's desk, the cedar chest Miss Ruth had mentioned, every place where paper and scent and silence had once lived side by side. Amara watched the windows without blinking much. She had gone quiet in the way children sometimes did after adults finally believed them. Not proud, not relieved, just tired in a place too large for tiredness to look natural. Jonathan noticed and walked over to the bench where she sat. He did not stand above her this time. He lowered himself beside the iron armrest, one knee bent, careful not to crowd her. Are you cold? He asked. Amara shook her head, though the answer was only half true. She was cold, but it was not the kind of jacket fixed. Jonathan seemed to understand the difference. You should have been home hours ago, he said softly. I know, Amara replied. Miss Ruth said it was only going to be a ceremony. Jonathan looked toward the terrace, the lights, the box, the officers, the half-raised monument. So did I. The sentence stayed between them for a moment, quiet and unfinished. Then footsteps sounded from the house. Detective Ortiz was returning, moving fast without rushing, one gloved hand holding a clear evidence sleeve. Behind her came Miss Ruth, pale and trembling, and another officer carrying a navy notebook sealed inside a second plastic bag. Jonathan rose before Ortiz reached the table. What did you find? He asked. Ortiz placed the first evidence sleeve beneath the portable light. Inside was a scarf, pale blue at the edge just as Miss Ruth had described, folded around a small brass key and a handwritten card. The second bag held the notebook Helena had mentioned in the video, its worn corners and pressed pages carrying the exhausted dignity of something written not for beauty, but survival. The notebook was in the cedar chest under the false bottom, Ortiz said. Not missing. Hidden deeper than the room recording implied. Either she moved it after the video or she wanted anyone who searched casually to think it was gone. Jonathan stared at the notebook as if it had returned from underwater. Miss Ruth pressed both hands together near her mouth. She outsmarted them. She whispered, almost to herself. Even frightened, she still outsmarted them. Wheeler stepped closer. May we review it here? Ortiz nodded. Photographs first. Then I want statements on chain of access. The forensic technician documented every angle, every page edge, every fiber on the scarf. The process was slow, deliberate, respectful in its own unsentimental way. Amara watched the notebook more than the adults did. She could tell it mattered because everyone powerful in the garden had stopped performing and started waiting. When Ortiz finally opened it, the first page revealed Helena's handwriting, tighter even than the note from the envelope. Dates lined the left margin. Names, medication changes, visitor times, server access notes. Small arrows connected events that on their own might have looked harmless. Together they formed a pattern too disciplined to dismiss. Helena had built herself a map through the fog others were trying to place around her. Jonathan read over Ortiz's shoulder in silence. Monday, Kessler arrived at 4:12 p.m. spoke with Evelyn in hallway before entering. Tuesday, desk drawer left open by half an inch. Foundation login notification while I was at lunch. Friday, Jonathan signed travel packet without reading page 3. Need to tell him without triggering Evelyn's performance voice. At that line, Jonathan shut his eyes briefly. Wheeler looked away. The detective kept turning pages. There were sketches too. Quick diagrams of the blue room desk, the south sitting room terminal, the line of sight from the upstairs guest room to the south garden. Helena had documented not only what happened but where it happened, as if she knew truth needed architecture if no one believed instinct. Then Ortiz stopped at a page flagged with a torn piece of receipt paper. This one, she said. The entry was dated 2 days before Helena died. The writing was more rushed, pressing deeper into the page. Found out statue proposal moved ahead. I said no monument in South Garden. Evelyn pretended the consultant misunderstood. Impossible. She found the box or saw me outside. If she covers it with stone, Jonathan will spend years looking at her version of me and never once think to look beneath it. If this notebook survives, tell him I tried every honest door first. The garden went silent again, but this silence had grief in it now, not just shock. Jonathan read the line a second time. Every honest door first. It sounded like Helena, not because it was polished, but because it carried that exact mixture of intelligence and ache she had hidden from public rooms. Miss Ruth began to cry openly then, old quiet tears that did not ask permission. She kept trying, she whispered. I saw it, and still did not understand what I was seeing. Jonathan took a slow breath and looked at Ortiz. There is enough now, is there not? The detective did not answer immediately. She turned another page, then another, until she reached the back cover. Tucked inside was a folded printout from the estate security console showing a manual camera archive deletion request submitted at 12:49 a.m. from the south sitting room terminal. The user override line carried an administrator credential tied to household operations. Not Helena. Not Jonathan. Evelyn. Ortiz slid the printout free and held it beneath the light. There is enough for several charges, she said. Her voice stayed even, but the words altered the night anyway. On the terrace, one guest sat down suddenly, as if his knees no longer trusted him. Kessler's shoulders sagged. Evelyn, who had stood in rigid silence for the last several minutes, finally spoke. You think paper makes you moral, she said, though the edge was gone from it now. You think because she wrote things down, she becomes pure and I become the villain. Helena was not easy to live with. She questioned everything. She made every room tense. Jonathan turned toward her very slowly. No, he said. You made the room tense. She made the room honest. The detective stepped between them without drama, just enough to establish the boundary the law preferred to make visible. Miss Shaw, she said. At this point, I am advising you to stop speaking until counsel is present. Evelyn laughed once, but there was no brightness left in it. Counsel, she said softly, almost to herself. Of course. Jonathan did not look triumphant. That was what made the moment land harder. There was no pleasure in his face, only a weary clarity arriving after too much damage. He looked back at the notebook, then at Amara on the bench, then at the hole beneath the raised monument where truth had sat under weight and flowers waiting for someone small enough, quiet enough, or stubborn enough to notice the wrongness in the ground. Lower the statue, he said at last. Everyone turned toward him. Even the maintenance foreman straightened. Jonathan's gaze remained on the open earth. Not back over the hole, he added. Move it to the east lawn. Let it stand somewhere no truth has to carry it. The order settled over the garden like the first act of mercy the estate had seen all night. The foreman nodded and moved toward the lift controls. As the hydraulic motor hummed again and Helena's marble likeness began to drift slowly away from the pit where the box had been hidden, Amara watched the empty ground reappear in full. Dark soil, clean edges, nothing beautiful about it, nothing arranged. And for the first time since she had spoken, the garden no longer felt like it was holding its breath. It felt like something buried had finally been allowed to breathe on its own. The statue moved slowly across the east lawn under the white glare of the portable lights, its marble face turned away from the hole it had been made to guard. The straps creaked softly with each inch, and the hydraulic lift gave off a low mechanical hum that sounded almost respectful now, as if even the machine understood it was correcting something it should never have been asked to do. No one in the garden clapped this time. No one spoke about beauty or remembrance or legacy. Those words had been used too carelessly already. What remained now was smaller and truer than all of that. Damp soil lay open where the monument had stood. The edges of the pit were neat under the forensic lamps, dark against the trimmed grass. And in that simple rectangle of disturbed ground the whole evening seemed to find its real shape. Not a memorial, an exposure, not a ceremony, a reckoning. Detective Ortiz's team continued their work with calm efficiency, labeling the notebook, photographing the printout from the security console, sealing the forged documents, securing the recorder and the laptop. Wheeler moved between them and the house with the precise focus of a man determined to make usefulness his apology. The guests had thinned now. Some had been dismissed after statements. Others lingered at the terrace in uneasy silence, reluctant to leave because leaving would mean admitting they had witnessed something larger than scandal. They had watched power fail to protect itself from a child's honesty. They had watched wealth lose an argument with dirt. Evelyn stood near the garden path with her shoulders still straight, but the performance had left her. Without control, elegance looked lonely. Dr. Kessler had stopped speaking entirely. An officer waited beside him with a patience that made resistance seem tired before it began. Miss Ruth remained close to Amara, one hand resting lightly between the child's shoulders as though she needed proof of something warm and living after all the cold evidence spread under the lights. Jonathan Mercer stood alone for a moment beside the open ground, Helena's notebook in one hand and the muddy white ribbon in the other. The sight of him there would have confused anyone who only knew him from magazines or conference stages. There was no billionaire polish left in the way he held himself. No public pose. Just a man in a white dress shirt gone soft with evening creases, looking down at the earth with the expression of someone who had finally found the place where his life split in two. He read one line from Helena's notebook again, not out loud this time, just with his eyes. Every honest door first. The words did not accuse him anymore. They settled inside him. He could see all those doors now in painful sequence. Her questions, her pauses, the arguments in the blue room. The moments he had chosen smoothness over friction because smoothness was easier to live inside. He had loved her, and still he had answered her fear with explanations. That was the hardest truth of all, not that evil had entered his home wearing perfume and polished shoes, but that love without listening had helped clear a path for it. A few steps away, Amara sat very still on the bench, watching the workers finish repositioning the statue on the far side of the lawn. In the distance, beyond the gates, traffic moved in thin whispers along the road, ordinary life continuing as if this estate had not just opened its own heart and found deception folded neatly inside. Jonathan turned and walked toward her. Miss Ruth straightened, uncertain whether to move, but he gave the smallest shake of his head. He stopped in front of Amara and then, without ceremony, without concern for the damp gravel under his trousers, he knelt fully so they were eye level. The white ribbon and the notebook were still in his hands. Portable light caught in the dampness at the corners of his eyes, though his voice, when it came, was steady. "I owe you something," he said. Amara looked at him carefully. Children knew when adults were speaking from manners and when they were speaking from someplace deeper. This was deeper. "You do not owe me money," she said after a second. A few people nearby almost smiled through the heaviness of the night. Jonathan did smile then, but it was brief and tired and real. "No," he said, "not money." He looked down at the ribbon in his hand, then back at her. "I owe you the truth spoken plainly. You were right. You were brave. And everybody here should have listened the first time." Amara held his gaze. "Even you." The question was simple, clean, impossible to hide from. Jonathan nodded. Especially me. The wind moved through the rose beds, carrying up the scent of wet leaves and turned soil. The night had deepened into that soft dark blue that comes just before full black, when house windows glow brighter than they really are, and every light seems to float. Behind Jonathan, officers moved in measured patterns around the evidence table. Farther off, the statue of Helena was lowered onto fresh ground in the east lawn, no longer above the buried box, no longer standing over what someone had tried to keep hidden. Jonathan held out the ribbon to Amara. "You found this before any of us found our courage," he said. "I think it belongs with the notebook now." Amara looked at the ribbon, then at Helena's worn navy notebook. She reached out with both hands and laid the ribbon gently across the cover, mud-stained end and all. It looked strange there, a child's small found thing resting atop pages full of fear, dates, proof, and patience. Yet together they made a kind of sense the adults in the garden could feel immediately. One was the record of truth buried carefully. The other was the reason it had not stayed buried. Miss Ruth pressed a hand to her mouth again, but this time her tears carried relief with the grief. Jonathan rose slowly and turned toward Detective Ortiz. "When you are done processing the notebook," he said, "I want a copy of every page preserved exactly as she wrote it. No edits. No summaries." Ortiz nodded. "You will have it." Jonathan looked back at the open ground one last time. "And I want the south garden left exactly like this for now." Wheeler glanced toward the exposed rectangle of soil, the lifted turf edges, the marks where the straps and equipment had pressed into the grass. "Sir," Jonathan answered without taking his eyes off it, "I do not want it fixed overnight. I do not want flowers brought in by morning. I do not want someone smoothing it over before the house remembers what happened here." Wheeler's expression changed in a way only someone watching closely would catch. Respect, stripped of habit, and rebuilt on something firmer. "Yes, sir," he said. The last of the guests were escorted out soon after, their polished shoes clicking softly over stone, their voices low, their departures free of the usual social warmth. Nobody asked for photos. Nobody asked for statements. Some truths made even the privileged understand silence. Kessler was led toward the front drive for transport and questioning. Evelyn followed under escort, her coat pale under the lights, her face unreadable from a distance now that all the expressions she used to control. Rooms had failed her. She did not look back at the statue. She did not look back at Jonathan. The house behind them seemed larger with her absence already, not warmer, just less arranged. Miss Ruth touched Amara's shoulder. "We should go home, baby," she whispered. Amara nodded, but before she stood, she looked toward the east lawn where Helena's statue now rested beneath a row of small cypress trees. It looked different there, less like a performance, more like memory allowed to breathe. Jonathan followed her gaze. "She hated grand gestures," he said quietly. "I should have remembered that before tonight." Miss Ruth gave him a look full of old sorrow and harder mercy. "Then remember it now," she said. He nodded once. No defense, no explanation, just acceptance. Amara slipped off the bench, Jonathan's jacket still around her shoulders, and handed it back to him with both hands. He took it, but not before noticing how tiny her fingers looked against the dark fabric of a life too large for her to have had to interrupt. "Thank you, Miss Amara," he said. Not kiddo, not sweetheart, not some polished nickname adults used when they did not really see children. Miss Amara. The respect in it settled over the garden more warmly than the terrace lights ever had. Amara shrugged a little, suddenly shy. "I just heard it," she said. Jonathan looked toward the ground, the evidence table, Helena's notebook with the muddy ribbon resting across it, then back at the child standing in front of him. "No," he said softly. "You listened. For a long moment, that was all. No music, no speeches, just wind moving through the roses. Officers working under white lamps, the smell of wet earth lifted into cold night air, and a man learning too late what decency sounds like when it comes from someone the world had trained him not to notice." Then Miss Ruth took Amara's hand and led her toward the service path. Halfway there, Amara turned once. Jonathan was still standing by the open patch of garden, notebook in one hand, jacket over his arm, watching the place where the statue used to stand as if the ground itself were speaking and he intended, at last, to hear every word. He did not look like a billionaire then. He looked like a witness. The portable lights cast long pale beams. Across the grass, Beyond them, the east lawn held Helena's likeness under quieter trees, away from the buried box, away from the lie that had tried to turn memory into cover. The open earth remained untouched, dark and honest under the night sky. And in that stillness, with the house finally stripped of its smooth excuses and the truth no longer carrying stone on its back, the only thing left to feel was simple enough for even a child to understand. She had not changed the whole world. She had changed what one powerful man was finally willing to see. And for that house, for that night, for the woman who had tried every honest door first, that was enough.